Across the world, people have recorded their own final seconds without ever realizing death was in the frame. Cameras stayed steady as planes shredded into the sky. Volcanoes exploded beneath tourists' feet. And glacier currents dragged kayaks into freezing darkness. Storms capsized boats, avalanches buried climbers alive, and burning towers became tombs while phones kept filming. There was no warning, only the exact moment when life turned into a silent, unstoppable disaster. Every clip is real. Every final breath, every last scream, every desperate second, captured and preserved forever. And every person in these recordings never made it home. This is what happens when the camera captures the final moments of life. Viewers' discretion is advised. Tier 1 Case 1. Irma Bule, 2016, West Java, Indonesia, stage video. April 3rd, 2016, a humid evening in Karawang, West Java. Irma Bule, a 29-year-old dangdut singer known for her daring stage performances, stood on stage before a sea of eager fans. Her signature act involved live snakes, and tonight was no different. The crowd was ecstatic as she danced with her usual fearless energy, the microphone in hand, her bright blue dress glittering under the lights. Irma had been performing with snakes for 8 years, and for the last 2 years, she had incorporated cobras into her act. She had mastered the art of working with dangerous creatures, and the crowd loved her for it. But tonight, a tragedy was just moments away. Irma stepped onto the stage, her confidence evident, as she performed with a king cobra. The cobra, one of the deadliest snakes on the planet, was coiled near her feet, ready for the routine she had done countless times before. The king cobra, which can grow up to 5.5 meters in length, is found across Southeast Asia and southern China. Its venom, strong enough to kill an elephant, can cause paralysis, respiratory failure, and death in humans if not treated immediately. As Irma moved, the snake suddenly reacted. She stepped on its tail, a mistake she'd made many times before without issue. But this time, the cobra struck. It latched onto her thigh, sinking its fangs deep into her flesh. The crowd, unable to distinguish the danger, cheered, thinking it was part of the act. Irma, ever the professional, didn't miss a beat. She took a step back, looked down, and felt the burn of the venom spread. For a moment, the audience still believed it was part of the performance, but Irma's body began to react. She kept dancing, but her movements became slower, more strained. She tried to mask the pain, continuing to dance, but it was clear something was wrong. She refused help when offered, even when someone suggested an antidote. "No," she said, "I'll be fine." Minutes turned into an agonizing stretch of time. Despite the growing pain, she continued to sing. She didn't stop, and the audience, unaware of the seriousness of the situation, continued to cheer. But the effects of the cobra's venom were starting to take hold. Approximately 45 minutes after the bite, the venom began to take its toll. Irma's body started to convulse. Witnesses reported seeing her vomit, her muscles seizing as the poison spread through her bloodstream. Her face twisted in agony, but she refused to stop performing. At this point, the snake's venom, potent enough to kill an elephant, had begun to affect her central nervous system. It caused paralysis, preventing her from moving normally, and ultimately led to respiratory failure. As she collapsed, the audience's applause turned to confusion, then concern. The music stopped, people screamed her name, and the stage lights seemed to dim in response to the sudden panic. She was rushed backstage, but it was too late. The venom had already taken its deadly course. Irma Boulay died shortly after being rushed to the hospital. The cause of death was confirmed as the effects of the cobra's venom. The tragedy was a chilling reminder of how quickly danger can strike, and how, in the pursuit of performance, even the most fearless can fall victim to nature's wrath. Irma had performed with boa constrictors and pythons before, but the king cobra's venom proved too much. In the days that followed, her death became a topic of national conversation, sparking debates about the ethics of using live, dangerous animals in performances and the risks involved. The footage of her final moments, captured in grainy video and circulated across the world, serves as a haunting reminder of the dangers Irma willingly faced in her pursuit of entertainment. Her story didn't just end with her tragic death. It became a warning to others who might follow in her footsteps. The venom of the king cobra, deadly and swift, had claimed another life. But Irma's legacy remains, both as a performer who entertained the masses and as a symbol of the risks performers take in their quest to thrill. The footage of her final act is both captivating and tragic, a testament to her bravery and ultimately the danger of performing with creatures far beyond human control. Case 2. Skydiver Ivan Maguire, 1988. It was the 2nd of April, 1988, a very bright Saturday. The Franklin County Sports Parachute Center, located in rural North Carolina, was alive with activity. The sky above was clear and perfect for skydiving. The sound of engines filled the air as planes ascended to drop jumpers from 10,500 feet. Among them was Ivan Maguire, 35 years old, a seasoned skydiver and cameraman with over 800 jumps to his name. On that day, Maguire had already completed 2 successful jumps before preparing for his third and final dive of the day, a tandem skydive with a student. Maguire was no stranger to the sky. His hands moved confidently through the motions of the dive, strapping on his camera, checking his gear, and securing his GoPro to his helmet. He had done this hundreds of times before. The dive was routine, nothing out of the ordinary. He was filming for the tandem skydive, capturing the moment of freefall for his student. There was no sign that today would be different. At 10,500 feet, Maguire and his student jumped from the plane, the wind rushing past them as they fell. The GoPro camera recorded every second, the rush of freefall, the earth shrinking below, the beauty of weightlessness. For Maguire, it was another jump, exhilarating, but not without its risks. But as Maguire fell through the sky, something went terribly wrong. As he reached for his ripcord, his hand mistakenly grabbed the wrong handle. His body, trained through years of experience, acted on muscle memory. But instead of pulling the ripcord, Maguire had grabbed the strap to his camera bag, which had been packed in place of his parachute rig. In that brief moment of confusion, the trained professional had made a fatal error. The footage recorded by Maguire's GoPro captured the panic in his voice. "Oh my God, no!" The camera shakes violently as Maguire searches in desperation for the ripcord. His expression is one of horror as he realizes his mistake, the sense of urgency clear in his frantic movements. But it's too late. The ground is rushing toward him, and there is no way to deploy the parachute. The camera wobbles, and the video ends abruptly. Hours later, Maguire's body was found in a field, miles away from the drop zone, his parachute unopened. The GoPro camera, still attached to his helmet, was recovered. The footage was examined, showing Maguire's fatal mistake. The moment when, in the chaos of freefall, he reached for the wrong cord. An investigation into Maguire's death confirmed that he had been experienced, with no history of errors in his jumps. Foul play and suicide were ruled out as causes. It was clear that Maguire's mistake had been purely human, an accident made in the confusion of the moment. However, the investigation raised questions about pilot oversight. Safety regulations required the plane's pilot to check that every jumper was properly equipped with a parachute before they exited the aircraft. In Maguire's case, it was not clear if this check had been performed. The video, while disturbing, stands as a chilling reminder of how easily a small mistake, even after hundreds of successful jumps, can lead to disaster. It also became a pivotal moment in the skydiving community, sparking discussions about safety regulations, equipment checks, and the critical importance of routine. Maguire had completed 2 successful jumps that day, and his third, tragically, would be his last. The GoPro footage, despite its haunting nature, captured the exact moment when everything changed, when muscle memory and experience failed him. In those final seconds, Maguire fought for his life, and in the silence that followed, the weight of his mistake became a tragic lesson for the sport. Case 3, Space Shuttle Columbia, STS-107, 2003. On Saturday, January 16, 2003, the engines of the Space Shuttle Columbia roar to life beneath the dawn sky at Cape Canaveral. 7 astronauts, Commander Rick D. Husband, pilot William C. McCool, mission specialists Michael P. Anderson, Kalpana Chawla, David M. Brown, Laurel Clark, and Ilan Ramon, the first Israeli astronaut, rise through a column of fire, bound for 16 days of research in the heavens. This mission, designated STS-107, was the 28th flight of Columbia, the 113th for the Space Shuttle fleet, and the 88th flight since the Challenger disaster. It was dedicated entirely to research in various fields, primarily conducted aboard the Space Hab module inside the shuttle's payload bay. Inside the cabin, the crew is at ease, performing their checks, engaged in routine conversation, and occasionally filming the quiet beauty of space. Laurel Clark, mission specialist, keeps a small digital camera within arm's reach, capturing floating pens, drifting notebooks, and the breathtaking curve of the planet below. In her final message home, she writes, "Hello from space. The journey so far is amazing." 16 days later, dawn touches the Florida coast again, but this time, Columbia is descending from orbit. A procedure so practiced, Mission Control calls it textbook. At 8:44 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Columbia begins its re-entry into Earth's atmosphere, the heat from its 17,500 miles per hour descent creating a blazing trail. The crew is calm. Their visors are raised, straps tightened, displays glowing green and amber. They film the light blooming outside the windows, the re-entry spectacle of orange plasma rolling over the shuttle's wings. Their voices are steady as they run through final checks: cabin pressure, velocity, flight path. Nothing seems wrong. But just minutes before, a piece of insulating foam had broken off from the space shuttle's external tank during launch and struck Columbia's left wing. The foam's impact damaged the thermal protection system, which would eventually cause catastrophic failure during re-entry. No one in the cabin is aware of this. Everything seems routine, calm, and controlled. At 8:59 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the shuttle's trajectory begins to shift, and a loud crack tears through the silence. The shuttle shudders, and warning lights flash across the instruments. Inside the cabin, the crew begins to react, adjusting control inputs, switching power buses. The system failures begin. The left wing's damage worsens, and heat breaches the orbiter's thermal protection. The fuselage is now exposed to intense heat. Yet the crew fights on, never knowing the full extent of the destruction outside. The camera captures the last few seconds, the lens shaking violently as Columbia tumbles and breaks apart. The shuttle's final seconds are marked by silence, a sharp, sudden end. The footage cuts out as the shuttle disintegrates at 8:59 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. What follows is a tragic streak of white fire across the Texas sky, and the shuttle's final pieces scatter over fields in Texas and Louisiana. On the ground, people hear what they think is thunder. The recovered video reveals nothing more than the ordinary: a calm crew performing routine work at the edge of space. The video of Columbia's final moments isn't a spectacle of horror. It's the image of human vulnerability in the face of immense, invisible forces. The shuttle's destruction was caused by something small, something seemingly insignificant, a piece of foam. It was a mistake so small, it went unnoticed during the mission, yet it was powerful enough to destroy the shuttle during re-entry. In the aftermath, NASA's investigation revealed the full extent of the damage. The foam strike, initially overlooked, triggered a cascade of failures in Columbia's thermal protection, setting the stage for its tragic end. But in the final frames, it's the crew's humanity that resonates. People so dedicated to the mission that even as their fate turned, their faces remained calm, focused, and professional. Tier 2, Case 1, Yeti Airlines Flight 691, Pokhara, 2023. January 15th, 2023. Midday sun rests on the snow-rimmed hills surrounding Pokhara Valley. An ATR-72 belonging to Yeti Airlines begins its descent from Kathmandu, its 45-minute flight almost complete. The route is familiar to the crew, a routine hop between Nepal's busiest airports. There are 72 people on board, 68 passengers, 37 men, 25 women, and 6 children, 3 of whom were infants, along with 4 crew members. Among the crew, Senior Captain Kamal KC leads the flight, with Anju Katiwada, a co-pilot nearing her qualification for captaincy, in the second seat. This flight, an unplanned opportunity for instruction, carries personal weight for Katiwada. Her husband, Deepak Pokhrel, also a Yeti Airlines employee, had died in a crash years earlier. Today, she is set to complete her final step in qualifying as a captain. Inside the cabin, passengers lean toward the windows, smiling at the last glimpses of the horizon. Among them, a young man named Sonu Jaiswal pulls out his phone to stream the descent live on Facebook. The calm, joyful moments are captured. The vast green fields below, the terraced houses of Pokhara, the serene sky that seems to stretch on forever. Almost there, one passenger jokes as the camera tilts to catch the view outside. Jaiswal's voice is light and excited. The quiet hum of the engines fills the background, and everything seems as if it will end like any other flight. Safe, uneventful, routine. At 10:56 a.m. local time, the aircraft is cleared to land. Mission Control confirms the landing trajectory. In the cockpit, everything appears normal. The autopilot is disengaged, and Katiwada takes control, guiding the plane toward the runway. Jaiswal's phone captures the slow descent, his camera aimed out the window, scanning the valley below. Everything is calm, but just seconds later, a faint irregularity disrupts the routine. The left wing begins to dip, slightly at first, then more noticeably. A hum, deeper than usual, emanates from the engines. The camera shakes. Jaiswal briefly lowers his phone, perhaps unaware of the technical struggle unfolding. The plane's systems are malfunctioning, but the passengers remain unaware. Only the crew feels the tension mounting in the flight controls. A wrong move, an unplanned feathering of both propellers, leads the plane to stall. The aircraft begins its rapid descent. It feels as though the Earth is falling up toward them. At 10:57 a.m., the ATR-72 strikes the Seti Gorge just moments before reaching the runway. The first sound to reach the ears of those below is the roar of destruction, followed by a cloud of smoke and fire rising into the sky. The cabin disintegrates upon impact. Of the 72 people on board, 4 crew members, 68 passengers, none survive the crash. The wreckage is scattered in a narrow gorge between the old and new airports in Pokhara. Sonu Jaiswal's livestream, now infamous, remains as the only visual record of those final moments. The footage, a stark contrast between the ordinary and the catastrophic, ends abruptly. There is no sound of panic, no screams, only a faint whine of the engines, the sudden tilt of the aircraft, and then silence. In the aftermath, investigators from the Civil Aviation Authority of Nepal review the wreckage and the flight data recorders. The technical analysis confirms the tragedy. While preparing the aircraft for landing, the crew inadvertently set the propellers to the feathered position, a configuration that halted engine thrust entirely, sending the plane into an uncontrollable dive. Despite this, the crew fought to regain control in the final seconds, but the outcome was inevitable. The bodies of the victims were recovered, many beyond recognition due to the severity of the fire. Authorities began returning the remains to the families by January 17th, including the 2 US citizens who had been on board. The final moments of the flight, captured in the passengers' live stream, remained a haunting testament to the fragility of life. Even as the faces of the passengers are not fully seen, their journey ended in shared humanity. The footage, once an innocent live broadcast, has since become a stark reminder of the unforeseen tragedies that can unfold in an instant. As the story of Yeti Airlines Flight 691 becomes a part of history, the world remembers it not through facts alone, but through the faces and the final moments captured on camera. Proof that even in routine, there is the unthinkable. Case 2. Grenfell Tower, Rania Ibrahim's live stream, 2017. It was 1:30 a.m. on June 14th, 2017. The night was warm for London, and the streets below Grenfell Tower were quiet, save for the occasional passing car. In the early hours of the morning, the towering structure, over 200 feet high, with 24 floors of concrete and glass, became the site of one of the most horrific tragedies in modern British history. Inside the building, Rania Ibrahim, 30, a mother of 2 young daughters, sat on the 23rd floor. The tower had been built in the 1970s, and in 2015, the cladding that covered the building's exterior had been replaced with cheaper materials in an attempt to improve its energy efficiency. The decision would come to define the course of the fire that would take place that night. At around 12:54 a.m., a fire broke out on the 4th floor, caused by a faulty refrigerator in one of the apartments. The flames spread quickly up the exterior of the building, igniting the cladding and sending a deadly heat wave through the structure. The fire moved up the outside of the tower at an alarming rate, feeding on the flammable materials that coated the building. Rania was in her flat with her two daughters, Hania, 5, and Fethia, 3. The family had been asleep when the fire began, but the smoke soon woke them. As Rania opened the door to assess the situation, thick black smoke flooded the hallway, and she could hear the sounds of people shouting from nearby apartments. The fire alarms had gone off, but they were barely audible over the rising roar of flames. The stairwells, usually the path to safety, were quickly becoming impassable. The lifts, already out of service, were not an option. The only way out was through the windows, but the smoke was so thick that visibility was reduced to almost nothing. Panicking, Rania turned to her phone. She opened Facebook Live, intending to make contact with anyone who could help. Her live stream began at 1:32 a.m., showing the chaos inside her flat. The camera wobbled slightly as Rania moved it toward the window, showing thick black smoke pouring into the corridor outside. A neighbor's voice can be heard faintly warning her, "Don't open the door. You'll bring the smoke inside." In the video, Rania's voice is calm but shaky. "Hello? Hello? Is anyone there?" she calls out to her Facebook audience, sounding more confused than terrified. She steps cautiously toward the balcony, the camera capturing a dim view of the apartment's cluttered furnishings and the glowing embers outside the window. The camera tilts to show her daughters, who are clutching each other in fear. "What's happening?" she asks, her voice still soft, almost a whisper. As the camera turns back to the window, the reality outside is grim. The fire has already begun to engulf the upper floors. The flames, bright and furious, stretch across the tower's exterior like an inferno racing up the side of the building. Rania's voice cracks. "I can't breathe. The smoke is too much. Please, someone help us, please." The phone captures the moment when the reality of the situation becomes clear. The fire had spread so quickly that escape was no longer an option. There would be no way out. The video ends abruptly at 1:40 a.m., just as Rania whispers, "Goodbye," into the camera. Those were her final words. The stream cuts off. At 1:51 a.m., the London Fire Brigade arrived at Grenfell Tower, but by that time, the fire was already too far gone. The exterior cladding, which had been made of highly flammable materials, acted as a conduit for the flames, allowing the fire to race up the building and spread to floor after floor. The fire quickly consumed the upper levels, causing the floors above the 15th to collapse. The fire continued to rage throughout the night, and by the time the sun rose, the entire north side of the building had been destroyed. The rescue efforts were hindered by the intensity of the flames, which were too strong to contain. The total death toll would later be confirmed as 72. Among the dead were Rania Ibrahim, her daughters Hania and Fethia, and many other residents who were trapped in the building. Some were unable to escape in time, while others were caught by the rapid spread of fire and smoke. Many survivors had to jump from windows to escape the blaze, only to fall to their deaths. The fire devastated the local community, and families were torn apart in the wake of the tragedy. Rania Ibrahim's live stream, which had lasted only 8 minutes, became a symbol of the disaster. It was shared across social media, showing the world the unimaginable horror of the night. The video was viewed millions of times, and it was discussed in public hearings and the subsequent inquiry into the fire. The inquiry found that the building's cladding was a major factor in the fire's rapid spread, and it criticized both the building's management and government officials for their failure to ensure the safety of Grenfell Tower's residents. The decision to install cheaper, flammable cladding had turned a building that should have been a safe haven into a death trap. In the aftermath, survivors and the families of victims pushed for justice, demanding accountability for the fire and the way it had been handled. The tragedy led to a broader conversation about housing inequality, fire safety regulations, and the treatment of marginalized communities. Case 3. White Island/Wakari Eruption, New Zealand, 2019. December 9th, 2019. A clear morning stretched over the Bay of Plenty. The sea was calm, the sky a sharp blue, the kind of peaceful scene that invited adventure. Far from the shore, White Island, known as Wakari, that which can be made visible, rose from the ocean, its slopes scarred and steaming. The volcano had been dormant for decades, but still alive, its periodic rumblings considered just a part of its natural rhythm. It was one of New Zealand's most active volcanoes, a popular destination for thrill seekers and tourists eager to see the Earth's fiery heart up close. On that morning, 47 people, mainly tourists from Australia, Malaysia, and the United States, set out for the island, unaware that they were about to encounter one of the deadliest volcanic eruptions in modern history. A boat named Phoenix left the port at Wakatane just before 10 a.m. and made the hour-long trip across the bay toward White Island, its hull cutting through the glassy sea. On board were couples, families, and solo travelers, each drawn by the promise of a rare adventure: to walk the crater floor of an active volcano, surrounded by vents, boiling mud pools, and sulfur-smothered ground. As the boat neared the island, the scene seemed almost surreal. The island's rugged, barren surface glowed under the midday sun, patches of yellow sulfur contrasting against the blackened rock. Around 11:30 a.m., the first group of tourists disembarked onto the island's volcanic floor. They were given hard hats and gas masks, mandatory equipment to protect them from the sulfuric fumes that occasionally grew thicker in the air. The island, despite its stark beauty, held an ominous presence, but there was no fear among the visitors. Laughter echoed off the crater walls, and phones quickly appeared to capture the surreal sight. Boiling mud pits, smoldering vents, the unmistakable scent of sulfur in the air. They filmed each other, standing against the backdrop of the smoking cone, smiling and sending the footage back to family and friends. The first video to surface online would be a bright, upbeat selfie from a couple traveling from Australia. The woman, laughing, panned the camera across the glowing sulfur lakes and the distant steaming crater. "Isn't this amazing?" she said, her voice light. Behind them, the active vent released another puff of steam, almost unnoticeable in the camera's frame. 11:47 a.m. The phone camera from one of the tourists begins to wobble. A sudden deep rumble fills the audio. Tourists stop in their tracks, looking around. Something feels off. The guide turns, his face now serious, telling everyone to move quickly. The ash plume begins to darken. A sharp hissing sound, almost like a pressure cooker about to burst, grows louder. "Move away from the vents," the guide shouts. At 11:48 a.m., without any further warning, the island explodes in an instant. A phreatic eruption, the rapid release of pressure from trapped steam, rips through the earth beneath the crater. The force is overwhelming, with superheated ash, rock, and gas shooting into the air at more than 100 meters per second. The temperature inside the plume reaches over 600 degrees Celsius. Within seconds, the eruption becomes a blinding, suffocating cloud of volcanic debris. The tourists who had been filming, their phones raised, are caught in the eruption's violent force. The footage cuts abruptly as the camera is engulfed by heat and smoke. The eruption sends a massive ash cloud 3 kilometers into the air, visible from miles away. Ash begins falling heavily on the boats near the island, coating them in thick grey layers. By 12:30 p.m., helicopters are circling above White Island, their blades cutting through the smoke. But the island is now unrecognizable, a wasteland of blackened rock and burning steam. Firefighters and rescuers fight against both the physical threat and the lack of visibility, trying to navigate the island's interior, now completely covered by ash. By the time the rescue teams reach the island, many of the survivors have been severely burned. The heat from the eruption, coupled with the ash and sulfur, has left people trapped and immobilized. Despite efforts to get them to safety, 22 people survived, many suffering burns over 70% of their bodies, while 25 others, including the tour guides, lost their lives. In the following days, investigations reveal that the eruption was entirely unexpected, even though the island had shown signs of heightened activity. There were no significant seismic warnings that might have signaled the imminent eruption. The phreatic nature of the blast meant that it had occurred with little to no precursor. Experts later explain that the steam buildup, occurring under the surface, could not have been predicted. In the days after the eruption, survivors and witnesses give interviews. They speak of the eerie calm that preceded the eruption, the steady steam rising from the crater, an experience they thought was as harmless as any other. What remained behind, however, was a story of how quickly things could change, of how beauty could turn to death in an instant. Today, White Island remains closed to the public, and authorities continue to assess the safety of the area. The island's eruption has left a scar on New Zealand's tourism industry and a lasting mark in the minds of those who witnessed it. Survivors are left to heal, but the digital footage they left behind continues to remind the world of how fragile human lives are against the raw force of nature. Tier 3, Case 1, Nanda Devi Climbers, GoPro, 2019. May 25th, 2019. The wind at nearly 20,000 feet cuts like a knife. Snow drifts swirl and sting the skin through every gap in the fabric. A rope line moves slowly across a sharp ridge near Nanda Devi East, one of the tallest peaks in India. 8 climbers move together, 4 from Britain, 2 from the United States, 1 from Australia, and their Indian guide. Every breath is short and painful in the thin air. The sound of metal spikes biting into ice is the only rhythm. Attached to the helmet of the last man, a GoPro camera records it all, a moving chain of color against a white, endless slope. The view is quiet and steady. Blue sky above, a sheet of snow below, each climber just a few meters apart. The snow crunches under heavy boots. Frost clings to jackets and ropes. Nothing in the video shows danger, only tired bodies pushing upward, careful and confident. Someone mutters something faintly, maybe to check the rope tension. Another turns and lifts a hand in signal. Everything seems normal. The mountain looks calm. Then the sound changes. A deep, dry crack. It echoes like a gunshot through the valley. The camera jolts as the rope line pulls tight. A section of snow beneath the lead climber shifts. First a small plate, then the entire ridge fractures. The camera shakes violently. The sky and ground flip. A roar builds, low at first, then deafening. White fills the screen. For a split second, the shapes of the climbers appear. Arms flailing, rope whipping, the surface collapsing under them. The GoPro captures bodies tumbling, helmets striking rock, snow exploding upward like smoke. Cries are swallowed by the sound of the avalanche. Then everything turns gray and silent. Search teams would later find 7 of the 8 bodies buried deep in packed ice. The avalanche had thrown them hundreds of meters down the slope, smashing their gear and breaking bones against rock walls before covering them in hard snow. Only one man, Martin Moran, the expedition leader, was never recovered. When rescuers reached the site 2 weeks later, they discovered the camera still attached to a helmet, half frozen, its lens cracked, but the memory card intact. Inside were the last recorded minutes of the team alive. Investigators pieced together what happened. The group had been climbing toward a new, unclimbed route on the east face of Nanda Devi. The ridge they crossed was a cornice, a shelf of snow hanging over empty space. The weight of all 8 climbers likely made it snap. Once the cornice broke, there was no time to react. The avalanche dropped nearly 2,000 feet, carrying snow, ice, and rock at more than 100 miles per hour. There was no chance of survival. The mountain kept their bodies for weeks before giving them back. Their ropes were still tangled together when rescuers dug them out. Some helmets were crushed, some faces still frozen mid-expression. They had fallen in formation the same way they climbed, one after another, connected until the end. Today, the ridge remains unclimbed. Locals say Nanda Devi is not a mountain that forgives pride. The GoPro video, though never released in full, stands as proof of that moment, the fragile line between strength and helplessness. In the end, it wasn't a storm or a mistake that killed them. It was a single, hidden weakness in the snow, a quiet break that turned the mountain into an open grave. And through the camera's last frozen frame, the Himalaya took its silence back. Case 2, Carl Bunish, Norway, 1984. July 7th, 1984. The cliffs of Trolltindane, Norway, stood tall and sharp, slicing into the clouds. The air was filled with wind and the echo of waterfalls. It was one of the most dangerous cliffs in the world. 3,000 feet of pure granite dropping into the valley below. On that ledge stood 43-year-old Carl Bunish, a camera fixed to his helmet, eyes glowing with purpose. He wasn't just a daredevil, he was a physicist, a filmmaker, and a man obsessed with proving that falling could be a kind of flying. To him, base jumping, from buildings, antennas, spans, and earth, wasn't reckless. It was freedom, carefully calculated through science. Carl had spent years filming jumps in America, from Yosemite's El Capitan to deep desert canyons, until the government banned them. So he came to Norway, where there were no such laws. The cliffs of Trolltindane would be his greatest project, a film that captured both beauty and risk. For 3 days, he and his wife Jean worked with a European TV crew, recording perfect jumps. Each leap showed precision, checking the weather, adjusting straps, measuring wind speed, everything done with the care of a scientist. On July 6th, Carl made what he called the best jump of his life. His parachute opened cleanly, sunlight flooding the frame. When he landed, he laughed and said, "The best day of my life." But the next morning, the weather changed. Gray clouds rolled in. The air turned cold and unpredictable. John hesitated, and the crew suggested waiting. But Carl was determined. "Let's roll one more," he said. It would be his last jump. The footage starts calm. Carl stands steady on the cliff, breathing deeply. He steps forward and leaps. The air rushes past, his body perfectly balanced for the first few seconds. Then a sudden crosswind hits. The camera wobbles as the gust pushes him sideways toward the cliff. John's voice comes through the radio. "Carl, wind's changing." But it's too late. The video shows the granite wall spinning closer. He tries to correct his fall, but when he opens his parachute, it's too close to the mountain. The chute inflates halfway, catches air for a moment, then snaps sideways. The impact comes fast. The camera records the sickening sound of his body hitting the rock, a deep thud of bone and stone. His body ricochets, spinning, slamming again. The parachute shreds in the wind, cords tangling around his shoulders and neck. Blood splatters across the lens, and the screen tilts toward the clouds. The sound of rushing air fills the recording. Then silence. John screams his name from above. The crew radios for help, their voices breaking. It takes hours for rescuers to reach the valley floor. When they find him, Carl is wedged between boulders, eyes open, body broken. His ribs and arms are shattered, and the parachute cords are twisted tightly around him. The camera is still running, its battery fading to static. The first impact had been enough to end his life instantly. 2 days later, Jean climbs the same cliff. Against everyone's pleas, she puts on her parachute gear. Carl wouldn't want the mountain to win, she says. Cameras roll again as she jumps and lands safely. Her leap becomes both an act of mourning and a message of courage. Carl Burnish's death shocked the world. To the public, it was a tragic accident. To fellow jumpers, it was the price of pushing the limits of flight. His final footage remains sealed in studio vaults, too painful to release. But those who've seen it say it captures everything about him: the beauty, the risk, and the surrender. Today, every base jumper who steps off a cliff does so in his shadow. Trolltindane became both his grave and his legacy, the place where one man's dream of flying met the truth of gravity. Case 3, Dean Potter, Yosemite, 2015. May 16, 2015. Evening settles over Yosemite National Park, the sky turning from bronze to violet. Far below, the Merced River winds like a ribbon of light through dark forest. High above the valley, at the sheer edge of Taft Point, stand two men in wingsuits: Dean Potter, 43, and Graham Hunt, 29. The ledge is barely wide enough for two backpacks. Wind combs through the pines. A raven drifts past and disappears into the void. Potter stands motionless, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Behind him, a compact camera crew finishes setting up. They've been filming him all week, documenting his training, his philosophy, his obsession with finding what he calls the line between life and art. Dean isn't a thrill-seeker in the usual sense. For more than 2 decades, he's been one of the most respected climbers alive. He's walked high lines without safety harnesses, climbed El Capitan solo at night, and base jumped from cliffs all over the world. He calls it a meditation in motion. To him, flight isn't rebellion, it's prayer. But this jump is different. Wingsuit base flights are illegal in all U.S. national parks, banned after years of accidents. Rangers know who he is. He's been fined, detained, even banned from Yosemite for his defiance. Yet he keeps coming back. "If I stop," he once told a reporter, "I stop being me." That evening, the plan is to leap from Taft Point and follow the contour of Yosemite Valley, a line barely wide enough to clear the cliffs. It's an incredibly technical route, fast, narrow, and unforgiving. But Potter has flown it before. He checks the weather. Winds light, visibility clear. Hunt nods silently beside him. Dean clips on his helmet camera, tightens the chin strap, and glances once more toward the west, where the last sunlight hits Half Dome. "Ready," he says quietly. Then he takes one long step forward and vanishes into air. The instant he drops, the valley erupts in sound. The wind hits like a wall, loud, rhythmic, consuming. His body stabilizes, wingsuit inflating, air flowing under the nylon. He levels out, gliding a few feet from the cliff face, tracing the shape of the rock as if painting with his shadow. Hunt follows close behind, both moving faster than any car on the road below. For nearly half a minute, the flight is perfect. The GoPro footage later recovered shows the granite glowing with twilight, the valley opening wide beneath them, the rhythm of controlled descent. Potter Banks left toward a spur ridge, his trajectory smooth and deliberate. Every sound, the wind, the beating of air through the suit, the faint click of his altimeter blends into one continuous rush. Then, in a heartbeat, everything changes. The valley narrows sooner than expected. A downward draft curls up from the forest, invisible but powerful. The footage trembles. The roar of air shifts pitch. Potter dips his right arm, trying to level out, but the gust presses him toward the wall. Hunt veers off course to avoid collision. The terrain below rises sharply, steeper, closer, more violent than it looks from above. The camera catches a flash of granite filling the frame. There's a sharp sound, then the image lurches and goes still. Nothing more. Search teams are alerted the next morning when the two fail to check in. Rangers and volunteers scour the valley floor, their voices echoing between the cliffs. By mid-morning, a helicopter spots fragments of colored fabric high in the ravine. Rescue climbers descend, moving carefully among loose rock. Near a talus slope, they find both wingsuits. The chutes are still packed, unused. The scene is quiet, except for wind moving through pine branches. News spreads within hours. For the climbing world, it's disbelief, followed by silence. Potter had seemed untouchable. Part philosopher, part daredevil, the face of a generation that believed the human body could belong to the sky. His partner and girlfriend, Jennifer Rapp, issues a short statement. Dean lived for the beauty of flight. He knew the risks better than anyone. He died doing what he loved. Media outlets pick up the story across the globe. The Guardian calls him the spiritual outlaw of Yosemite. Time writes that his death marks the end of climbing's romantic age. Friends remember how he'd spend hours sitting alone at Glacier Point, sketching flight lines in the air with his hands. To them, he wasn't reckless. He was deliberate, disciplined, and endlessly curious. The investigation confirms what everyone suspects. There was no mechanical failure, no broken rig, no equipment error. The air currents simply changed at the wrong second. A reminder that in that realm of thin air and stone, nature always decides. Dean Potter's ashes are scattered in Yosemite. To many who come after, the place feels different now. Taft Point is still there, vast and indifferent. But visitors sometimes say the air feels heavier, the silence deeper. The footage from that night remains sealed in evidence archives. Too intimate, too final. But those who viewed it describe something haunting. A man gliding perfectly until the end, moving with the same calm focus he'd shown his entire career, disappearing into the dusk he'd spent his life chasing. Tier 4, Case 1, Dahab Blue Hole, Diver, Yuri Lipsky, 2000. The Red Sea was calm that afternoon, too calm for what waited below. Off the coast of Dahab, Egypt, the blue hole shimmered like a portal cut straight into the earth. To tourists, it looked beautiful. To divers, it was infamous. They called it the Diver's Cemetery. Beneath its sapphire surface lay a vertical shaft over 100 meters deep, connected to the open sea by a tunnel known simply as the Arch. Dozens had died there before. 22-year-old Yuri Lipsky believed he would not be one of them. He had been diving for 2 years, confident, ambitious, and eager to prove himself. He worked as a dive instructor and dreamed of setting a personal depth record. That morning, he strapped on his gear, clipped a small helmet-mounted camera, and told friends he planned to go deep just to see. The blue hole was glowing turquoise under the sun. Fishermen watched him wade in, unaware they were seeing him alive for the last time. At first, everything was routine. The footage from his helmet shows his slow descent through clear water, bubbles rising around him like silver beads. Sunlight flickered through the surface above, painting his gloves in gold. He looked relaxed, in control. But by 60 meters, the light began to fade. The deeper he went, the darker the water became. Blue shifting to gray, then to black. Pressure built around him. His breathing grew faster. The depth gauge ticked down fast. 70 meters, 80, 90, far beyond what a single tank of air could support. Then, the video changes. His breathing becomes sharp, irregular. The camera trembles slightly as he checks his gauges, the first sign that something isn't right. At that depth, nitrogen narcosis sets in, clouding the mind like alcohol. Divers call it the rapture of the deep, a slow, dreamlike confusion that kills without warning. He likely believed he was still in control. In truth, his buoyancy device was no longer working. He was sinking faster with every second. The footage captures him trying to inflate his vest. Nothing happens. His hands start to move quicker, pulling at straps, checking hoses, glancing around for the line back to the surface. The sound of his breathing turns to gasps. Then comes the moment no diver forgets. Panic. He tries to swim upward, but can't. The heavy weights drag him down. He lays the camera on the sand at the bottom, maybe hoping to free his hands. The lens tilts upward, capturing a final shot of bubbles, rising toward the light, and his shadow still moving. Moments later, his movements slow. His body stiffens. The footage ends. He had reached 115 meters, nearly 4 times the safe recreational limit. The next day, renowned rescue diver Tarek Omar descended to recover him. He found Yuri's body lying face down on the seabed, the helmet camera still recording. The water had preserved everything: the images, the sound, even his final breaths. Omar later returned the footage to Yuri's mother, who kept it as her son's last message. The blue hole has claimed more than 100 divers since. Some say it lures people in with its beauty, promising peace and finding pride instead. But Yuri's story changed the world of diving forever. His final video became a lesson that no amount of confidence can outswim the ocean's depth. He went chasing a record and filmed his own death instead. And in the silence of that endless blue, the camera kept rolling long after he stopped. Case 2. Helen Wendy Nyabuto, Ontario, Canada, 2022. August 18th, 2022, 2 p.m. The sun over Chatsworth, Ontario is high and sharp. The community pool behind a quiet apartment complex ripples in late summer stillness. A phone leans against a folded towel at the deck's edge, its lens pointed toward the water. On the screen, a smiling 24-year-old nurse named Helen Wendy Nyabuto, broadcasting live on Facebook. She greets her small online crowd in a mix of English and Swahili, easy, laughing, full of energy. Helen moved from Kisii, Kenya to Canada to study nursing and now works long shifts at a local care home. The live stream is her way to stay connected with friends an ocean away. "I'm off today," she tells them, brushing water from her hair, just relaxing. For several minutes, the scene is ordinary. She swims slow laps across the shallow end, climbs the ladder, reads comments aloud. Pop music hums from a nearby speaker. Viewers type encouragements. "You're glowing." "Enjoy, sister." Some tease her about Canadian weather. She laughs, pushes off the wall, and drifts farther out. 2:32 p.m. A small splash interrupts the rhythm. The camera trembles as a wave laps over the phone. Helen's voice fades into wind and water noise. Then a short gasp, barely audible. The surface breaks once again, then goes still. The phone keeps streaming. In the comments, hearts and emojis continue to flow. No one realizes what has happened. Some think she's diving. Others type questions. "Where did you go?" "Come back on camera." The feed shows only moving reflections of sky. The live stream runs for more than 3 hours. At dusk, a tenant notices the phone glowing by the pool, still connected. Its battery almost dead. Emergency responders arrive and find Helen in the deep end. Paramedics pronounce her dead at the scene. The police classify the event as an accidental drowning. No evidence of foul play. News spreads quickly across continents. Yahoo News, CTV News, and the Toronto Star verify details from police reports and the archived stream. In Kenya, her family learns through relatives in Canada before authorities can reach them. Her father, still in Kisii, tells reporters through tears, "She worked so hard to help us all. She wanted to come home in December." Community groups in Ontario organize fundraisers to return her body to Kenya. In early September, hundreds attend her funeral, watching on yet another live stream, this time directed toward her hometown church. Candles flicker, the congregation sings her favorite hymn, "It is well with my soul." In the weeks that follow, the clip becomes the focus of public discussion about live stream culture and water safety. Specialists explain how drowning often happens silently, without thrashing or screams, only quick exhaustion and breath lost to panic. Her friends say they still hear her voice sometimes when they scroll through old videos, bright, ordinary, full of life, reminding them how, in an age where every moment can be shared, even joy can disappear in real time. Case 3, Timothy Treadwell, Alaska, 2003. October 5th, 2003, Katmai National Park, Alaska. The wind pushed low clouds across the yellow tundra, and the air smelled of rain and decay. Coastal grizzly bears were everywhere, feeding before their hibernation. Timothy Treadwell, 46, had spent 13 summers in this wilderness, calling the bears his friends. He believed that by living among them, he could protect them from poachers. This year, he stayed later than usual, deep into October, when food was scarce and the bears were becoming irritable. Alongside him, in their small tent, was Amy Huguenard, 37, a physician's assistant from California, who joined him that summer. Treadwell's journals, later recovered, show a man torn between his love for the bears and growing unease. On October 2nd, he noted the arrival of several large male bears, unfamiliar to him. On October 4th, he mentioned a storm and thin salmon runs and a big bear with a patchy coat circling the camp at dusk. Rangers had warned him several times that his camp near the mouth of Kaflia Bay was too close to a prime bear feeding area. Despite the risks, Treadwell felt he was part of the wilderness, believing the bears would accept him. On October 5th, Treadwell and Amy filmed hours of ordinary wildlife. Bears waded through shallow streams, ravens flew over the tide line, and Timothy joked to the camera. Later in the day, they filmed more footage, but one camera remained inside the tent, still loaded with film. The audio from this camera was recovered later, but the lens cap was still on, so there was no video. The timestamp on the audio was 1908 Alaska time. The 6 minutes of audio, though never released publicly, were confirmed in reports by the National Park Service and Alaska State Troopers. Experts who reviewed the recording described the scene. Treadwell's startled voice, followed by the low roar of a bear. He shouts to Amy to run, and Amy's frantic voice joins his, calling for help. She tells him to play dead. The growling bear and movement can be heard, possibly from cooking gear being struck. For about 3 minutes, the recording alternates between wind, the bear's breathing, and human screams. Then, there's a long silence, broken only by Amy's voice and the bear's roar. After 6 minutes, the recording ends abruptly. The next day, when Treadwell failed to radio his pilot, air taxi owner Willie Fulton flew to the site. From the air, he saw a collapsed tent and no movement, with a bear feeding nearby. The official report identified the bear as a large adult male, Bear 141, one that Treadwell had filmed earlier that season. Rangers found evidence that the couple had stored food improperly and their tent was too close to active bear trails. There were no signs of self-defense, such as bear spray or firearms, and both Treadwell and Amy were unarmed. Treadwell had become a legend among park biologists, but also a frustration due to his reckless behavior. His films, more than 100 hours of footage, showed a man who was alternately tender and volatile, talking to the bears, naming them, and occasionally shouting about protecting my friends. He had become famous for his closeness to the animals, but his actions were a dangerous mix of charisma, good intentions, and carelessness. When Werner Herzog directed the documentary Grizzly Man in 2005, he watched the fatal audio privately, but chose not to release it. Herzog later spoke with Treadwell's friend, Jule Palovac, telling her, "You must never listen to this recording. Destroy it." He reflected in voiceover, "What haunts me is that in all the faces of all the bears, I discover no kinship, no understanding, no mercy. I see only the overwhelming indifference of nature." The camera recovered by the tent was locked away with Alaska State Troopers, and only a transcript of its time code appears in the investigative file. The deaths were ruled as accidental predation by a brown bear, the first fatalities recorded in Katmai in 85 years. Tier 5, Case 1, R. Bud Dwyer, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, AF 1987. On January 22, 1987, the Pennsylvania state capitol was quiet except for the shuffle of reporters and the hum of fluorescent lights. It was a cold morning and the air smelled faintly of floor polish. Journalists from all over the state had gathered to hear Robert Bud Dwyer, the state treasurer, give a routine political address. Dwyer, 47, had been in the headlines for months after being convicted on 11 counts of conspiracy, mail fraud, and bribery. He was accused of taking kickbacks for awarding a state contract to a California firm, Computer Technology Associates. Although he denied all charges, claiming he was framed by political rivals, his sentencing was scheduled for the following day. Dwyer faced 55 years in prison and a $300,000 fine. That morning, Dwyer stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. His voice was steady, almost calm, as he thanked his family, friends, and staff, and spoke of faith and justice. He told the crowd, "I am innocent of the charges against me," and declared, "I will not resign as Treasurer of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania." Some reporters lowered their cameras, assuming his speech was nearing the end. But then Dwyer paused, his left hand trembling slightly as he reached for a manila envelope on the podium. The sound of paper sliding filled the room. and as Dwyer pulled out a .357 Magnum revolver, gasps and shouts filled the air. Someone off-camera screamed, "Don't do it," and another voice pleaded, "Bud, please, put that down." Dwyer stepped back from the podium, his voice trembling, as he calmly said, "Please, leave the room if this will offend you." The reporters froze. Then, without warning, Dwyer raised the weapon to his mouth and fired. The loud crack of the gunshot echoed through the room. Papers scattered, microphones fell, and some reporters screamed, while others stood frozen. The live feed collapsed into static. Within moments, police and paramedics arrived, but Dwyer was already dead. His speech notes were still neatly stacked beside the manila envelope, and a Bible rested nearby. Television stations faced a difficult decision. How much of the tragic event should they air? Some networks cut away just before the fatal moment, while others showed it unedited before quickly pulling the footage. National networks like NBC and ABC aired only the seconds leading up to the act with warnings. Newsrooms across America debated the ethics of showing such graphic footage. Investigators later found 3 sealed envelopes at Dwyer's home, each addressed to different people: his wife Joanne, the governor, and state legislators. In his final note, Dwyer explained that he couldn't bear the humiliation of a corrupt verdict and the thought of spending years in prison. He believed that by dying before sentencing, his family would still receive his full state benefits. This logic turned out to be correct. Because he died in office, his pension and life insurance remained valid. Dwyer's funeral in Meadville, Pennsylvania, drew thousands of mourners. His family received hundreds of letters expressing sympathy, but also outrage. Some blamed politics for his death, others praised his courage, and some condemned his actions as selfish. For years, his family insisted that he was innocent and pointed to inconsistencies in the case that led to his conviction. The footage of Dwyer's death became one of the most disturbing recordings ever captured on live television. It has since been studied in journalism schools under the label The Dwyer Dilemma, as it forced networks to confront the ethics of broadcasting death. In 2010, a documentary titled Honest Man: The Life of R. Bud Dwyer re-examined his trial and final day. Colleagues described Dwyer as a man broken but proud, caught between politics and principle. His story is remembered as a public tragedy, a collision between human despair and the unblinking eye of the camera. The press room where Dwyer took his life still stands on the second floor of the Capitol complex. Although the carpet has been replaced and the walls repainted, those who work nearby say the silence in the space feels different, as if the air remembers what happened there. The uneasy truth of Dwyer's death still lingers in that silence. A man destroyed by politics, yet immortalized by a camera that never looked away. Case 2. Steve Irwin, Queensland Coast, Australia, 2006. September 4th, 2006. Bat Reef, off Port Douglas, Queensland. The morning begins quiet and bright. The sky is a perfect Australian blue, sunlight dancing off the water. Beneath the surface, coral gardens ripple with color, and schools of silverfish move like liquid mirrors. On board a small aluminum research boat, Steve Irwin readies his diving gear, smiling as he adjusts the camera housings. He has done this thousands of times, approaching danger with trust, excitement, and deep respect. At 44, Irwin is more than a TV host. He is a global voice for wildlife, a man who turned risk into education. That morning, he and his crew are filming a segment for a documentary called Ocean's Deadliest, exploring the venomous creatures that inhabit Australia's reefs. Producer John Stainton and cameraman Justin Lyons recalled that nothing about that day felt unusual. The sea was calm, the visibility crystal clear. Around 11 a.m., Irwin slipped into the water near a wide sandy patch about 2 meters deep. They were searching for tiger sharks, but instead spotted a bull ray, a massive short-tailed stingray, flat, dark, and resting on the seabed. It stretched nearly 2 meters across. Irwin decided to capture a final pickup shot, swimming slowly above the ray to get a clear overhead frame for the documentary's closing scene. Through the lens, the stingray seems unbothered. Its wings move slowly, gliding across the sand like a shadow. Irwin hovers a few feet above, steady, calm. Then, in an instant too fast to predict, the animal bolts upward. Its long tail whips beneath him with violent precision. The barb, a jagged 20-centimeter spine lined with venom glands, strikes Irwin directly in the chest. At first, Lyons thinks the tail only brushed him. Stingrays are docile, not aggressive. But Irwin's face changes instantly. He clutches his chest and struggles for air. The camera wobbles, bubbles fill the frame. Lyons drops the rig and rushes forward. Irwin surfaces, pale, gasping. There's no blood at first, only shock. Then the wound darkens. The barb has pierced his heart, the venom flooding his system in seconds. Lyons and Stainton drag him onto the inflatable boat. Lyons begins CPR, counting out compressions as the boat races toward low isles. Irwin never regains consciousness. His breathing slows, then stops. Stainton radios emergency services again and again, his voice cracking as he repeats, "We've lost Steve." Queensland police seize the footage for the coroner's review. Only a few seconds are shown to confirm the sequence of events. The rest is sealed indefinitely. The video, described by those who saw it, captures calm professionalism right up until the strike. No chaos, no screaming, just the mechanical hum of diving equipment and a moment that shifts from normal to tragic in less than 2 seconds. The stingray's barb had broken off inside his chest cavity, causing massive cardiac trauma. Death, the report concluded, was immediate. News of Irwin's death travels across the world within hours. Tributes pour in from every continent. Flags in Australia are lowered to half-mast. At Australia Zoo, thousands gather with flowers, stuffed animals, and handwritten letters. His wife Terry and their 2 children, Bindi and Robert, appear days later to thank the public. The grief feels shared, personal, collective, national. Experts later confirm how rare such an incident was. Stingrays rarely attack humans. This was a freak event, a single defensive motion gone tragically wrong. For the crew, it was a reminder that nature, no matter how familiar, can change its rhythm without warning. The waters of Bat Reef remain calm again now. Somewhere beneath them, the same currents still drift past the corals where he spent his final moments. The ocean that gave him his life's purpose took nothing from his legacy. His laughter, his energy, his boundless awe for the wild live on. Not in that unseen tape, but in every child who still says his name with wonder. In the blink of an eye, lives are changed forever. From moments caught on camera to the silence that follows, these stories remind us that some tragedies unfold in real time, captured, remembered, and never forgotten.